If I had a farm in Vietnam and a home in hell, I'd sell the farm and go home. And I mean that. That sentence came out of my mouth one night in 1967, and it stayed with me ever since. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't some colorful war story meant to entertain. It was the plain, bitter truth, forged out there in the mud and smoke of Quang Tri province. I was Lance Corporal, United States Marine Corps. Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, part of the 3rd Marine Division. We were known then as the Walking Dead, a nickname we'd earned for sustaining some of the highest casualty rates in the entire Marine Corps. Our orders placed us in the northernmost region of South Vietnam, in I Corps Tactical Zone, just south of the demilitarized zone. We were the shield against the North Vietnamese army crossing into the south. I had volunteered for the Marines back in 1965. I wasn't drafted. Nobody forced my hand. I was 19, fresh out of high school in Ohio, full of restless energy and the kind of patriotism you carry when the flag means more than your own skin. My father served in Korea, my grandfather in the Second World War. I wanted to wear the eagle, globe, and anchor and stand for something bigger than myself. In the late summer of 1966, I landed in Vietnam as part of Operation Prairie. The mission was simple on paper: prevent North Vietnamese forces from re-establishing positions south of the DMZ. In practice, it meant weeks of patrolling hills and valleys near Con Tien, Cam Lo, and Gio Linh, hunting an enemy who knew the terrain better than we ever would. By the time Prairie shifted into Prairie 2 and Prairie 3, we had learned to live with mud in our boots, leeches on our legs, and fear tucked somewhere between our lungs and our stomachs. Quang Tri during the monsoon was a kind of misery you can't wash off. The rain never stopped. The mud wasn't just brown, it was red, thick, and clung to everything. It stained your utilities, your rifle sling, your skin. The sky was the color of dull lead, and the clouds hung so low you felt you could reach up and touch them. Days blurred into nights, and the only way to tell the difference was the change in the pitch of the artillery. The first week out there, I lost my appetite. Not from the sea rations, they were bad but not that bad, but from the smell. A mix of wet earth, diesel fuel, and something else I couldn't place at first. It took me a few days to realize it was the scent of bodies, sometimes our own, sometimes theirs, lying out in the rain until they could be moved. We lived in sandbag bunkers and shallow fighting holes. Rats scurried over us in the dark, searching for scraps. Mosquitoes whined in our ears. The Viet Cong and NVA probed our lines constantly. Small arms fire at night, mortar rounds during the day. If you heard the thump of a mortar tube, you prayed you weren't in the landing zone. If you didn't hear it at all, it was already too late. In July 1967, we got pulled into Operation Buffalo, moving toward Con Tien. The NVA had set up in strength, waiting for us to walk into their fields of fire. On July 2nd, our battalion took some of the heaviest losses I'd ever seen. Marines cut down by machine gun fire, shrapnel from mortars, and artillery tearing through lines. In less than a week, we lost over 150 Marines killed and more than 800 wounded. The enemy losses were higher, but numbers never tell the real story. The real story is in the empty spaces at evening roll call. I can still see Tommy, a kid from Tennessee, grinning the day before he caught it. We were on a muddy trail talking about what we'd do when we got home. He wanted to buy a motorcycle, ride it clear across the states. The next morning he was face down in the mud, blood pouring from a hole in his chest. We dragged him back, but he was gone before the corpsman got to us. That was the first time I'd zipped a body bag shut. I was scared, sure. Any man who says he wasn't is lying or crazy. But I was a Marine. And Marines don't run from the fight. I clung to that thought like a lifeline. In the chaos, it was the one thing that kept my boots moving forward. Fear is a constant in combat. It makes your hands shake, your stomach knot. Pride is what steadies them. The pride of wearing that uniform, of knowing the man on your left and right is counting on you, just like you're counting on him. But pride doesn't make you bulletproof. It doesn't stop shrapnel. It doesn't keep your best friend from bleeding out in your arms. Even the toughest Marine can bleed. and Quang Tri made sure we all did. We came in low, the rotor wash from the CH-46 stirring up the smell of wet earth and diesel fumes. It was the kind of landing where you keep your head down, not just because of the blades overhead, but because you don't want to make eye contact with what's waiting for you on the ground. Quang Tri Province, late monsoon season, 1966. The first thing I noticed wasn't the heat, it was the damp. It got inside your uniform, into your boots, under your skin. The humidity wrapped itself around you like a wet blanket, and it carried the smell of the rice paddies that stretched out beyond the landing zone. Somewhere off to the east, I could see the shimmer of the Thach Han River, swollen from weeks of rain, curling its way toward the coast. We trudged through mud thick as glue to reach the perimeter. The camp was a patchwork of sandbagged bunkers, canvas tents sagging under the weight of rainwater, and lengths of barbed wire that seemed more like decoration than real protection. Every few yards, a Marine stood watch, poncho hood pulled up, M16 cradled in his arms. You could see the boredom in their eyes, but also the wariness, like they were waiting for something to happen at any moment. They took us to our assigned area, a stretch of canvas over steel poles with cots that looked like they'd been salvaged from a junkyard. The floor was a mix of mud and crushed sandbags, the kind that turns into a swamp after the first hard rain. I set down my pack, trying not to think about how long I'd be calling this home. That first evening, I met the guys I'd be working with. Tommy from Tennessee, lean, grinning, quick with a joke. Morales from Texas, who rolled his own cigarettes and claimed he could cook better than the mess hall. Jenkins from New York, short, wiry, with eyes that never seemed to blink. We shook hands, traded hometowns, swapped a few stories. Somebody dug out a camera and we posed together, 5 Marines in damp fatigues trying to look like we belonged here. In the photo we almost do. Dinner with sea rations under the flicker of a Coleman lantern. The rain drummed steady on the canvas roof while the talk circled around what we'd heard about the province. Enemy patrols spotted near the DMZ, sniper fire along Highway 1, mines in the paddies. I chewed on cold beans and tried to memorize the faces around me. Out here, knowing the man next to you could be the difference between making it back to the States or not. That night, I lay on my cot listening to the sounds of the camp, the low murmur of voices, the occasional clink of a rifle being set down, the distant thump of artillery from somewhere beyond the river. Sleep came in fits, broken by the squelch of boots passing outside or the sudden hiss of the rain intensifying. Just before dawn, I woke to shouting. At first I thought it was a drill, but the tone was wrong, too sharp, too urgent. I pulled on my boots and stepped outside into the gray light. 2 Marines were carrying a poncho between them, the shape underneath rigid, unmistakable. The rain ran in rivulets off the slick green fabric, pooling in the mud as they moved toward the makeshift morgue. I caught a glimpse when they passed, a pale hand hanging loose before one of the men tucked it back under the cover. It was Jenkins, the guy I'd stood next to in the photo less than 12 hours ago. Word was he'd taken a round from a sniper during the night while out on perimeter watch. 1 shot. No warning. No chance. I stood there in the mud, staring after them until they disappeared behind a wall of sandbags. Around me the camp went on, men heading to chow, a jeep rumbling past, somebody cursing about a wet pack. Life here didn't pause for death. That's when it hit me, war doesn't wait for you to learn names. In boot camp they tell you about brotherhood, about never leaving a Marine behind. And it's true, we don't. But they don't tell you how fast it happens, how one day you're sharing a smoke and the next you're zipping that man into a bag. There's no time for grief. No ceremony. Just the quiet, constant exchange of the living for the dead. By mid-morning, the photo we'd taken the night before was already out of date. I kept thinking about the look on Jenkins's face in that snapshot. Serious, but with the corners of his mouth just starting to lift, like he was about to say something smart. I never found out what it was. I learned quickly that asking too many questions was a waste of time. Where's so-and-so? What happened to the guy from Alpha Company? Why didn't Morales come back from patrol? The answers when they came were short and heavy. Dead, wounded, gone. and soon I stopped asking. It happened 3 days after I set foot in Quang Tri. Until then, I'd only heard war in the distance. The muffled pop of small arms fire, the dull thump of artillery somewhere beyond the horizon. It was like listening to a storm rumbling far away. You knew it was coming, but there was still a small, foolish hope it might pass you by. That morning, the rain had eased to a drizzle, turning the mud from sticky to slick. We were moving along a narrow trail that cut through the rice paddies, water glistening under a gray sky. To the west, the jungle pressed close, thick with bamboo and tangled vines. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke. Somewhere out there, someone was burning something, though whether it was trash or bodies, I couldn't tell. Our squad leader, Staff Sergeant Whitaker, held up a fist. We froze. Somewhere ahead, just past a bend in the trail, there was movement, too deliberate to be the wind. He signaled us forward, slow and low. The first shot cracked through the air, snapping a branch inches from my head. In an instant, the world erupted. M16s barking beside me, AK-47s chattering back from the tree line. The enemy had been waiting for us, dug in and ready. Then the mortar started. There's a peculiar sound a mortar round makes when it's incoming, a soft whistle that grows until it's all you can hear. Then the ground bucks under your feet, the air fills with dirt and rock and fragments of things you don't want to think about. The first blast landed just ahead of us, throwing Tommy, my new friend from Tennessee, into the mud. He scrambled up, eyes wide, covered in dirt but somehow unhurt. I didn't have time to check on him. The second round landed closer and the concussion punched the air from my lungs. My ears rang so hard I couldn't hear myself shouting. We dropped into the paddies, the water up to my thighs trying to get low. Bullets sliced through the air, snapping past my ears, plucking at the mud around us. Somewhere to my left, a machine gun opened up, the sound a grinding roar. I'd been through training. I knew the drill: find cover, return fire, move when you can. But training doesn't prepare you for the smell, the bitter sting of gunpowder mixed with the metallic tang of blood. Or for the sight of a man you'd been talking to seconds ago lying still in the water, his helmet floating away. It was Jenkins all over again, except this time I saw it happen. PFC Harris, barely 20, took a round just above the collarbone. He was standing to my right, firing into the tree line, when the impact snapped him backward like a puppet with its strings cut. I caught him under the arms before he hit the water, and for a split second I thought maybe he'd just been knocked down. Then I saw the blood, thick and dark, pumping out between my fingers. I yelled for a corpsman, my voice raw, but the medic was already on another Marine farther up the line. Harris's eyes found mine, wide and confused, his mouth working but no sound coming out. I tried to tell him it was going to be all right, but the words felt hollow even as I said them. The firing didn't stop. Mortars kept dropping, bullets kept whining past. I had to let go of him, had to get my rifle back in my hands. The last thing I saw before I turned away was his face sinking under the brown water, his body rolling gently with the ripples. The fight went on for what felt like hours but was probably less than 30 minutes. We pushed forward in short bursts, trading fire, moving from paddy dikes to whatever cover we could find. The NVA were good, disciplined, patient. They'd hold their ground until the last possible moment, then vanish into the jungle before we could close the distance. When it was over, the air was thick with smoke, the ground littered with shell casings and broken gear. 3 of ours were dead. 5 more were wounded badly enough to be pulled out. The enemy left behind bodies too, but I barely noticed them. My eyes kept finding Harris, lying where I'd left him, the water around him tinged red. I'd been trained to shoot, not to watch my friends die. That night, back at the perimeter, I cleaned my rifle by lantern light, my hands moving automatically. The mud had gotten into everything: bolts, magazines, even the barrel. Across from me, Tommy sat silently, staring at nothing. Neither of us mentioned Harris. Neither of us needed to. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the moment again. The way Harris's body jerked, the sudden weight of him in my arms, the blood pouring hot over my hands. I kept hearing the whistle of the mortars, the snap of bullets, the hollow promises I'd made to a dying man. In the morning, the platoon sergeant read out the names of the dead. We stood in the mud, helmets off, heads bowed. No speeches, no prayers, just the names one by one, and then it was back to work. I realized then that Harris would not be the last. Not by a long shot. And there were more deaths coming, a lot more. By the summer of 1967, Quang Tri was no longer a place on a map. It was a wound that never stopped bleeding. The killing season had begun in earnest. Every day brought a new fight, every night another round of mortar fire. If it wasn't an ambush, it was a mine. If it wasn't a mine, it was an artillery strike from across the DMZ. We were in the middle of a game where the rules kept changing, and the only constant was death. It started before sunrise most days. The sky would be barely turning pale when the first rounds came in, 122mm rockets and mortar shells that fell without warning, exploding with a sound that tore the air apart. The concussion would knock you flat, the dirt raining down on your helmet like hail. You'd hit the ground instinctively, pressing yourself into the mud as if you could sink through it and disappear. On the worst days, the shelling didn't stop. It would go on for hours, shattering the perimeter, flipping over sandbags, collapsing bunkers. We'd run between blasts, hauling the wounded to cover, dragging the dead to the side until we could get them out. I remember one morning at Quang Tri, the ground so chewed up by incoming fire that the trenches we'd dug the day before were gone, replaced by craters deep enough to hide a man standing. When the shelling stopped, it wasn't relief, it was the prelude. That was when the NVA or Viet Cong would come, moving in through the smoke and dust. They knew we were disoriented, our ears ringing, our formations broken. They'd hit hard and vanish just as fast, melting into the jungle before we could regroup. Other days we were the ones sent out. Long patrols through the paddies and low hills, the sun beating down, the humidity wrapping around you until breathing felt like work. You'd think the rain would help, but it just made everything slick and heavy. The leeches came out in force after the storms, clinging to your legs until you felt them squirm under your socks. The danger wasn't just from the enemy you could see. The ground itself was a threat. The NVA had laid mines along the trails, in the paddies, even in the dirt paths leading to villages. One step too far and the world would erupt in a flash and a scream. I saw it happen to Morales. 1 second he was ahead of me, the next there was a blast of dirt and smoke, and when it cleared, his leg was gone from the knee down. The casualty numbers kept climbing. We'd lose a man to sniper fire in the morning, 2 more to a booby trap by midday, and another 3 in a firefight before sundown. Every patrol seemed to come back lighter than it left. You stopped looking for familiar faces in the chow line because the absences were too noticeable. And the bodies, they were everywhere. American Marines lying where they'd fallen, rifles still clutched in their hands. NVA soldiers in black pajamas, their lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. Civilians caught in the crossfire, old men, women, even children, lying in the dust outside shattered huts. There was no pattern, no mercy. Death didn't discriminate in Quang Tri. You could smell it before you saw it. The thick, coppery tang of blood, the acrid bite of spent gunpowder, and beneath it all, the sweet, sickening rot of flesh beginning to decay in the heat. The flies came quickly, swarming over the dead in black clouds that rose and fell with every disturbance. We did what we could to move the bodies, but in the worst fighting there wasn't time. Sometimes they lay there for days until the lines shifted enough for us to retrieve them. By then, the heat and rain had done their work. You learned to breathe through your mouth, but even then, the taste of it clung to your tongue. One afternoon, after a particularly vicious firefight near Gio Lin, I found myself crouched behind a blown-out wall, reloading. The air was thick with smoke, making my eyes sting. Somewhere nearby, a building was burning, the flames popping as they found pockets of trapped ammunition. I could hear the cries of the wounded, calling for medics, for friends, for mothers who weren't there. It was then I realized, in Quang Tri, even the air was trying to kill you. It wasn't just the bullets and shells. It was the air choked with smoke and dust, the rain carrying disease, the heat sapping your strength until you could barely stand. It was the constant tension in your muscles, the knowledge that every step, every breath could be your last. At night, lying in a damp foxhole, you'd try to sleep, but the smell was always there. Even after you washed your hands, it clung to your skin. Even after you changed your clothes, it lingered in the fabric. It followed you into your dreams, turning them into nightmares. We got used to talking less. Out there, words felt like a luxury. We moved, we fought, we carried the wounded, we buried the dead. The rest was silence. And yet, somehow we kept going. Not because we thought we'd make it out. Most of us had stopped thinking that far ahead, but because the man next to you was still standing and you couldn't let him stand there alone. I don't remember all their names anymore. Some I never knew. But I remember their faces, their voices, the way they moved when the rounds started coming in. I remember the sound of their laughter on the rare quiet nights, the way they'd pass around a can of peaches like it was a feast. Those memories are the only things that push back against the rest. The blood, the noise, the smell. But the truth is, the smell is stronger. It always has been. But the smell never leaves. There's a part of war they don't put in the training manuals. They teach you how to load a rifle, how to clear a jam, how to read a map, how to take a hill. They don't teach you how to zip a friend into a body bag. They don't tell you what it feels like when the weight in your arms isn't a pack or a crate of ammo, but a man who was laughing with you a day ago. By 1967 in Quang Tri, we were collecting the dead almost every day. After an ambush, after a mortar strike, after a firefight in the paddies, we'd move in once the shooting stopped, stepping carefully over the craters and the bodies. The routine became grimly efficient. One man would check for tags. Sometimes they were still around the neck, sometimes blown free and lying in the mud. Another would pull a black vinyl body bag from his pack and lay it open. We'd roll the Marine gently onto it, dirt and blood smearing across the surface, and then pull the zipper up until only the outline of a face remained before it disappeared beneath the plastic. I tried not to look too closely, but you can't help it. You see their faces and they stick with you. There was Reynolds from Iowa, 18 years old, freckles across his nose, hair the color of wheat. He'd been in country less than a month. One morning he caught a piece of shrapnel just below the helmet line. It didn't kill him right away. We worked on him for nearly half an hour, but when the medic finally shook his head, the only thing left to do was close his eyes and carry him back. There was Simmons, older than most of us at 26, a quiet guy who wrote letters every night to a girl back home. We found him after a firefight near Cam Low, his rifle still clutched tight, his eyes wide open. I remember thinking he looked surprised, like death had caught him mid-thought. And then there were the ones whose names I never learned. Replacements from other companies, men I'd only seen in passing at chow or on the perimeter. With them, it was even stranger. You didn't have memories to hold on to, just the image of a still body and the knowledge that a mother somewhere would be getting a folded flag. The hardest part wasn't the physical work. It was the questions. Every time I zipped a bag shut, I heard the same one in my head. Why him? Why not me? It wasn't guilt in the way people think of it. It was more like a bewilderment that never faded. I'd been in the same firefight, the same patch of mud, and somehow the bullet had found him instead of me. You start looking for reasons, bad luck, wrong place, a second too slow, but there's no pattern to it. Death in Quang Tri was random and absolute. Sometimes we had to leave the bodies until it was safe to come back. That was worse. The heat and rain would do their work quickly, and when we finally returned, the stench hit like a physical blow. Flies rose in thick clouds when you touched the body. The skin turned waxy, the features blurred. But no matter the condition, we treated them with the same care, straightening limbs, pulling the zipper slow, making sure the tags were secure. The living carried their own wounds. Some were obvious, bandages, slings, limps. Others were hidden, locked behind eyes that stared too long into nothing. We all had our own private inventory of images we couldn't scrub from our minds. The twitch of a hand in its last movement, the gurgle of a final breath, the look on a man's face when he realizes he's not going home. There's a saying that war changes you. I think that's too soft. War carves into you. It takes pieces you don't get back. One evening, after a particularly bad day near Quang Tri, I sat alone by the perimeter, cleaning the mud off my boots. My hands were stained dark, and no matter how much I scrubbed them in a bucket of water, the color clung to my skin. That's when it struck me, not just the futility of trying to get clean out here, but the deeper truth. You can wash the blood off your hands, but you can't wash it out of your head. I'd see their faces when I closed my eyes. Hear their voices in the quiet. Smell the mix of mud, blood, and cordite every time I took a deep breath. And that's when I learned about the wound no doctor could see. It happened on a patrol north of Cam Lo, early October 1967. We'd been moving through a stretch of open ground, the kind you learn to hate in Vietnam. No cover but the occasional paddy dike, nowhere to run if the shooting started. The air was heavy with the smell of wet rice stalks, the ground sucking at our boots with every step. The first shot came from somewhere we couldn't see. A sharp crack, then the flat whump of an M79 grenade launcher, and the paddy in front of us erupted in a spray of mud and water. We dropped instantly, rifles up, scanning for movement. Then the real storm began, machine guns from the tree line, mortars from God knows where. That's when I saw Mason go down. He was about 15 yards ahead, a big kid from Nebraska, built like a farmhand, always quick with a grin. A burst of AK fire caught him in the leg, spinning him sideways into the water. He tried to get up, but another round hit him high in the shoulder and he collapsed, face twisting in pain. Instinct took over. I started forward, crouching low, rounds snapping overhead. I could see him reaching toward me, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear over the gunfire. I was halfway there when Whitaker, our squad leader, slammed into me from the side, knocking me flat into the mud. "Leave him," he shouted, eyes blazing. I yelled back, something about not leaving a Marine behind, but then a mortar round hit less than 20 feet away. The blast shoved the breath out of me, my ears ringing, my vision full of smoke and dust. Whitaker's face was right in mine now, and he wasn't asking. He was ordering. "We can't reach him. You'll die out there too." I looked at Mason. He was still moving, trying to crawl, but the fire from the tree line was relentless. Every step toward him felt like suicide. And then another mortar hit, closer this time, showering us with mud and fragments. Whitaker grabbed my gear and hauled me back toward the dike. I didn't see Mason again. We pulled back, called in artillery on the enemy position, and by the time we pushed forward hours later, the paddies were empty except for a few scorched patches of earth and the bodies the NVA hadn't carried away. Mason wasn't one of them. Whether they took him or whether he died there in the mud alone, I'll never know. That night, I lay in my foxhole, staring at the low clouds, replaying it over and over, the look on his face, the way his hand reached out the moment I turned away. I told myself I'd had no choice, that going after him would have meant 2 dead instead of 1. But it didn't matter. The choice had been made and I was the one still breathing. That's what moral injury feels like. It's not the same as fear or even grief. It's the quiet, corrosive guilt that seeps into you when your actions, or your inaction, violate the code you thought you'd live and die by. In the days that followed, I started dreaming about him. Sometimes in the dream I made it to him and we both got out. Other times I watched him disappear into the water, calling my name. And sometimes, the worst nights, I'd wake up choking because in the dream it was me lying there and no one came. The guilt didn't make me weaker in combat. If anything, it made me fiercer. Every fight after that, I pushed harder, stayed out longer, fired until my barrel smoked. But it wasn't about the mission anymore. It was about trying to balance a scale I knew I never could. I began to wonder if I still deserved to be called a Marine. We wore the title like armor, but armor doesn't stop self-doubt. Every time someone said Semper Fi, I'd think about that day in the paddies and feel the word hollow out inside me. The strange thing was, no one else judged me for it. Not Whitaker, not the guys in the squad. In their eyes, it was a no-win situation and I'd done what any of them would have. But that didn't absolve me. Because the trial wasn't in their eyes, it was in mine. It's easy to talk about the wounds you can see. The limp from a bullet through the thigh. The scar from shrapnel in your side. Those heal more or less. But guilt doesn't close up. It digs in. Bullets wound your body. Guilt digs its hole in your soul. And yet, in the middle of that hole, something stubborn survived. Call it pride, call it duty, call it the sheer refusal to quit. Because even in hell, pride can keep you standing. The truth is, fear never left me in Vietnam. It sat there in my gut every morning when I laced up my boots, every time the sun dropped and we took our positions for night watch. It was there in the silence before an ambush, in the sudden whistle of incoming mortars, in the long walks through rice paddies where every step might be your last. But alongside the fear there was something else, something just as constant. Pride. Not the chest-beating kind, not the kind you use to impress people back home. This was quieter, deeper. It came from the weight of the uniform on my shoulders, the feel of the eagle, globe, and anchor over my heart, the knowledge that I was part of something that stretched far beyond my own life. I thought often about why I'd enlisted. It wasn't for adventure, though I'd told myself that at 19. It wasn't to escape my small town in Ohio, though that had been part of it too. The real reasons were simpler, older. My father had served in Korea. My grandfather in World War II. I grew up with their stories, not the sanitized versions you tell kids, but the ones shared in low voices over a late-night kitchen table. Stories about sacrifice, about holding the line, about never turning your back on the man next to you. And then there was the flag. At the recruitment office, it hung in the corner, lit by a single beam of sunlight. I remember standing there, right hand raised, repeating the oath, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to bear true faith and allegiance. So help me God. That oath had weight. It wasn't just words. Out in Quang Tri, with the rain soaking through my gear and the sound of artillery in the distance, it was the thing that steadied me. In the field, we reminded each other why we were there. Sometimes it was a joke, tossed over a foxhole to break the tension. Sometimes it was just a look, two pairs of eyes meeting in the middle of chaos, saying without words, "I've got you." One night, after a brutal day of patrols and a skirmish that left us muddy and exhausted, Tommy from Tennessee sat down next to me, his rifle across his knees. He took a swig from his canteen, wiped his mouth and said, "We're Marines. We don't quit." He didn't have to explain. We both knew what he meant. No matter how bad it got, no matter how much it hurt, quitting wasn't an option. We wore our uniforms not because they made us invincible, but because they reminded us who we were supposed to be. The dirt and blood that stained them weren't marks of shame. They were proof that we'd stood our ground. There were days when pride was the only thing that kept me moving. In the middle of a firefight, when my hands shook from adrenaline and my legs felt like lead, I'd focus on the patch on my shoulder, the weight of the rifle in my hands, the men counting on me to hold the line. Fear makes you shake. Pride makes you move forward anyway. And so we did. We moved forward through mud that swallowed our boots, through paddies littered with the dead, through heat that made the air shimmer and rain that turned the world into a gray curtain. We moved forward because the alternative was to stop, and stopping meant giving up ground, and giving up ground meant giving up lives. I won't lie, there were moments when I wanted to disappear, to close my eyes and wake up in my bed back home, far from the noise and the smell and the constant ache in my chest. But every time that thought crept in, I'd look around at the faces beside me, Tommy, Morales, Whitaker, and I'd remember that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for them and they were fighting for me. In Quang Tri, pride wasn't just an emotion. It was armor. It was the thing that let you step into the next day, even when the last one had taken more than you thought you could give. And forward we went, through hell itself. It began late in the afternoon, just as the heat of the day was starting to fade. We were dug in along a shallow ridgeline north of Quang Tri, watching the horizon turn from pale blue to the bruised purple of an approaching storm. I remember thinking the air felt heavier than usual, like the world was holding its breath. Then the first mortar landed in the middle of our perimeter, and everything exploded into chaos. The next few hours blurred into a single unbroken roar: machine guns, mortar rounds, the sharp crack of rifles, the thud of grenades hitting mud before they went off. The NVA came at us from three sides, moving fast, firing from the shadows of the tree line. Our own artillery answered, the shells whistling overhead before slamming into the jungle with bone-shaking force. Dirt and shrapnel rained down on us with every blast. The air was thick with smoke and the bitter sting of gunpowder. You couldn't take a breath without tasting it. We fought until the light was gone, and then we fought in the dark. Tracers cut through the night like angry red bees, marking the invisible lines between life and death. Flares popped overhead, spilling white light across the battlefield for a few seconds before fading, plunging us back into blackness. In those moments of light, you'd catch glimpses: an enemy soldier breaking from cover, a Marine slumped against a sandbag wall, blood pooling at his feet. We worked in pairs, one firing while the other reloaded, trading places in a rhythm born of desperation. I saw Tommy go down once, hit in the helmet by a glancing round that knocked him flat. I dragged him into a shallow trench, my heart pounding until he groaned and shook his head, dazed but alive. Hours passed in fragments. 10 minutes of firing. A lull long enough to check your ammo and drink a mouthful of warm, metallic-tasting water. Then more firing, closer this time, the enemy pushing against our lines. The wounded were everywhere. Men calling for corpsmen, others too quiet, their bodies lying still in the mud. We pulled them back when we could, but sometimes the fire was too heavy. You'd lock eyes with someone 10 feet away and know you couldn't reach them without dying yourself. After midnight, the rain started. At first it was a light drizzle, almost welcome against the heat of the fight. But it grew heavier, turning the ground into a slick mess that sucked at your boots and swallowed your footing. Blood and water mixed until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I lost track of time. My watch had been smashed early in the fight, and without the sun, the hours bled into each other. The only way to measure them was by the number of times we repelled an attack, the number of magazines I burned through, the number of bodies we pulled out of the line. Somewhere in the small hours, I caught myself glancing toward the east, searching for the first hint of light. It became an obsession. Between bursts of fire, I'd steal a look at the horizon, willing the sky to change color, to give us a sign that this night would end. It didn't. Not yet. The attacks kept coming and we kept answering. My arms ached from the recoil, my shoulders burned from the weight of my gear. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest, but rest didn't exist here. When the sky finally began to pale, it felt unreal, like the night was a fever dream I'd never wake from. But the light kept growing, and with it came a grim clarity. The battlefield stretched out before us, littered with the dead. Marines. And VA. The line between them blurred by the mud, the rain, and the stillness of their bodies. Helmets lay overturned. Rifles stuck out of the ground at odd angles. A torn pack lay open, its contents spilling into a puddle. The smell hit next: blood, cordite, wet earth, and something sweet and sickening that told you the bodies had been lying there for hours. I looked around at the men still standing, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. We'd survived the night, but it didn't feel like victory. When the sun rose, it didn't feel like a new day. Just more time to die. And yet, we fought on. Coming home was supposed to be the easy part. The flight back was quiet. Most of us kept our eyes on the floor, lost in thoughts we didn't share. When the wheels touched down on American soil, people clapped. I forced a smile, but inside I felt nothing. My family was there at the airport. My mother crying, my father shaking my hand like I'd just won a championship game. They asked questions, the kind that come from love but land like stones. Was it bad? Did you see much combat? I gave the same answer every time. I'm here now, that's what matters. The truth stayed locked inside. How do you explain the smell of blood mixed with wet earth? The way a flare burns through the night, showing you a battlefield you wish you couldn't see? How do you describe carrying a friend's body when you can still feel the weight of it in your arms? At night, I'd hear it all again. The sharp crack of rifles, the low thump of mortars, the frantic shouts for a corpseman. Some nights, I woke drenched in sweat, certain I was still in Quang Tri. I could almost taste the cordite on my tongue. The world had moved on without me. Friends from back home talked about promotions, weddings, new cars. I nodded along, but their lives felt like they belonged to another planet. I'd stand in a crowded room and feel completely alone. I carried pride alongside the emptiness. Pride in having worn the uniform. Pride in standing with men who never quit, even when quitting might have been easier. Pride in surviving, even if survival came with its own kind of punishment. But pride has edges. Every time I thought of Mason, Harris, Reynolds, Simmons, the pride turned into a knot in my chest. I'd ask myself if I'd done enough. If I'd earned the right to be here when they weren't. And then there was the line, the sentence I'd said 100 times over there, the one that kept circling back in my head. If I had a farm in Vietnam and a home in hell, I'd sell the farm. In a heartbeat. I meant it then. I still mean it now. Quang Tri was hell on earth, and I wouldn't trade one more day there for anything. But the strange thing is, hell has a way of following you home. It hides in the quiet moments, in the spaces between heartbeats, waiting to remind you where you've been. So I live with it. Some days it's a shadow. Some days it's right there in the room with me. But it's mine to carry, and I carry it for the ones who can't. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. These aren't easy memories to share, but they're part of who I am, and part of who we are as Marines. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. It's not about glorifying war. It's about remembering it, exactly as it was, so we never forget the cost.